Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Welcome to September National Park Authority, I think they're calling it. So we'll get ready to make a start. It's a bit echoey, that, isn't it? So, moving to the agenda, just to let people know that the meeting will be live streamed, and we're starting that, I think, now. Thank you. So, the second item was emergency evacuation procedure. We're not expecting a practice, so if the alarm does go off, it's all out onto the lawn in front of the building in orderly fashion. There's a little bit of echo on the sound system, so.
It is at the side of the road.
Try that. Does that one work any better?
No.
Sounds pretty much the same. Okay, well, I'll do my best. If I shout here, it seems quite loud here and not so loud there, but we'll battle on. So, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from John Ritchie, David Jeffels, John McHugh, Abida Nayar, Joy Andrews, and Keith Wilkinson.
Chair, David Newgill said it's going to be a bit late. Okay, so breakdown on some machinery this morning.
Okay, thank you. Any others? No, very good, thanks. So moving on to item 4, it's the public minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of June 2024. I think you should have those on the agenda pack. You're happy to take those as a true record? I'll take that as unanimous. At 5 is public question time. It's an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions. And today we do have some questions, so I'll just quickly set out how I think we'll do that. Questions should be submitted in writing 2 days beforehand, and the person asking the question is able to ask the question that they have 2 minutes to do that, although I'm happy to be flexible on the time, and after they've asked their question, I shall give them an answer, and we shan't be debating that further. That's just the way the standing order works. So, I think it is, I have, excuse me, Jean Harrod. So Jean, if you'd like to come and sit there and use the mic. And I've got 5 questions from you, so I'm not quite sure how you want to play that.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Press
do.
the microphone.
Yeah, if you just press the button, then the live stream can hear you too.
Right. Well, my name is Jean Harrod, and I speak on behalf of the Rickle Drive residents group who oppose the Park Authority's HQ. I also emailed a community paper setting out a fuller picture of the situation in Rickle Drive more than I can give you in the 2 minutes now. We do not agree that the plot of land you have bought for £500,000 should be designated for employment, nor do we agree that you should build your new HQ on it. It's not NIMBYism. That land lies at the cul-de-sac end of a residential street and directly opposite 46 new houses. It should be developed for housing in line with the current government's planning objectives. You see, there are 2 extensive developments proposed at the southern end of Rickle Drive, which are linked and can't be considered separately. Your multi-million-pound project, plus Duncan Park, Northminster's application to build 50 houses, plus industrial employment premises on an adjacent field. The land area for the 2 developments amounts to the size of 6 FIFA-regulated football pitches. It's huge. And we have been fighting to stop Duncan Park development for more than a year and a half. We want to keep our community residential, so their application remains undecided. You see, if approved, the 2 developments would turn our community into a mixed-use industrial employment area with hundreds more cars, vans and trucks ploughing up and down Rickle Drive every day. I ask you all, would you approve that in your street? Remember, Rickle Drive is the only single-lane access road for South East Helmsley that already services 180 houses and 400 residents who use that road every day. Now, the National Planning Policy Framework and the government put the community at the heart of planning decisions. They highlight the need to consult the community, to focus on their health and well-being, to reduce pollution levels and traffic emissions, and introduce low-traffic neighbourhoods. Yet you have ignored all of this. You bought the land in secret, without consultation. It took a Freedom of Information letter from us for you to even admit you bought it in January. So the questions are, why have you ignored the requirement to put our community at the heart of planning decisions in Rickle Drive? 2, why do you feel it's appropriate to build a huge HQ and maintenance depot at the cul-de-sac end of a residential street on a plot of land directly opposite and feet away from new houses with young children and retired folk, putting their health and safety at risk every day? Why are you ignoring the NPPF requirement that evidence of the need must be provided to build on greenfield land? There's zero evidence of your need, since you will be just shifting jobs from one part of Helmsley to another. And finally, what discussions have you had with Duncan Park to collaborate in building a new road across their land to take all your industrial, commercial and employment traffic out of the southern end of Rickle Drive? Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. The thing is, the questions that you asked there aren't the same as the ones that I've got, which you submitted 2 days ago.
They are the same. I've just switched them round.
You switched them around.
I did a statement first, and then I've asked the questions. They are the same questions.
I didn't quite hear them as the same as I'm looking at here, but
Right.
what I can do, if you like, is to just give you a quick summary of the 5 questions that you submitted to us, which is what I have here.
Go on then.
Okay. And so your first question was about question 1 that you submitted, and it's about whether or not the development's appropriate on that site. And just my answer to that is that the National Park Authority feels it is appropriate to build an HQ and a ranger depot on the land accessed by Rickle Drive, because that has been agreed as part of the future growth for the Helmsley. It is on allocated land for business and has been agreed following a lengthy legal and democratic process which examined options and representations, objections from the public, and detailed evidence at a public inquiry which was held by the Planning Inspectorate. This land was identified and agreed as the main area for growth, for which over a 15-year period the access was confirmed acceptable for the land allocation by the Highways Authority, and the proposal is directly following the policies of the NPPF. On your second question, which is about the validity of the town plan and the changes that have been made following consultation, and I can say that the changes which have been made to the plan following consultation are increasing the landscape buffer between the building and the residential areas, increasing the amount of stone to be used on the main public facade, removing the proposed access directly from Rickle Drive, improved design of the windows and introduction of traditional stone entrance and walling. On your third question, which is in a similar vein, I have to say, about the level of traffic. The level of traffic arising from the proposal is intrinsically acceptable as the land is allocated for this use and has been agreed through a local plan process. The Highway Authority endorsed that plan, and further confirmation or otherwise will be made by the Highway Authority as a statutory consultee in the planning application process in due course. The fourth question. Again, the land is allocated for business use in the statutory development plan. And on your fifth question, the government's planning strategy is to significantly increase house building, but not at the expense of land already allocated for important economic uses. The use of that land was supported by the Helmsley community and the town council in endorsing a long-term plan for the future growth needs of the town. Hence, the local plan was adopted following the consideration of all of the issues of the public inquiry. I can supply those questions in full to you in writing, Jim. Thank you. Now, I have another public question from Mike Skeen. If you'd like to come down, Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. Rickle Drive is identified in the 2015 Helmsley Plan as a suitable service road. It linked already at that stage to three points to the Lines and Story Close. The plan allocates 4 further sites linked from Rickle, 2 residential, 2 commercial, one of these being the park site. The plan's brief for each of these sites requires that development be coordinated to ensure integration on traffic issues and allow for a future link to Sawmill Lane. The first approval was Rymore Gardens.
Mike, if I could just stop you, that's not the question that you submitted 2 days ago.
My question is at the end. It's
Okay.
a prelim to the question. Is that a problem?
So if you could, no, it isn't. If you could just sort of hang on to the 2 minutes, please, in submitting the question.
Do I get a restart?
No, you just keep going by all means.
The first approval was Rymore Gardens, at which point coordination flew out of the window. The design turned Rickle from a link road to a residential street, with 20 plus houses feeding directly onto that street, at a stroke negating Rickle's suitability as a link road. The potential volume of traffic from these sites and a link with Sawmill is viewed with absolute horror by most of that quarter of Helmsley, which is accessed only by Rickle Drive. Thankfully, on this point, the Environmental Health Officer has the same concerns, leaving the hybrid sites application stalled in planning for 20 months now and still running. We want to suggest to you, members of this board, individually, that you come and stand for a while at the north end of the residential stretch of Rickle Drive, and from there walk down to the park site, and then consider whether in this day and age you think it's appropriate, safe, or even fair to run all of that additional traffic of all shapes and sizes back and forth along that road. This park authority is known for the rigorous and exacting standards it sets within its jurisdiction. If it applied the same rigors to this proposal, it would not progress it any further. It should have the courage and, frankly, the professional nous to step back now and reconsider the options. We ask you, please listen to the people who live there. Don't inflict upon them what you would not inflict upon yourselves. And just in respect of your comments regarding the plan and its democratic basis and the ultimate inspection, everything signed off, you will, of course, agree that that was before Rymore Gardens was approved and turned the whole status of Rickle Drive on its head.
Could you ask your question now,
Thank
please,
you.
Mike? Could you ask your question, please?
We ask you, please listen to the people. I've just asked that question.
The question I have here, thanks. Okay. The question is, will the North York Moors National Park Authority reconsider its decision to develop a new HQ and depot on Rickle Drive? My understanding is that I would be allowed 2 minutes to expand upon that. So
I can't see what I've said
departs, no, I'm just being clear.
From that question one iota.
Thank you. Because my job here is to respond to the question that was submitted. So I can give you...
Sorry, Chair, it was the same question. This is what I heard as well.
Yeah. So I can just briefly answer that. But In saying that, I'd just like to sort of reiterate what the National Park Authority is here for. And its duties are bound by the, the Countryside Act 1949, as amended by the Environment Act 1995, to conserve and enhance the natural beauty, wildlife and cultural heritage of the National Park, and to promote opportunities for the understanding and enjoyment of the special qualities of the National Park by the public. Since 1995, it also has a duty in pursuing those two purposes to seek to foster economic and social well-being for local communities. So the National Park Authority's work is to deliver that in the National Park. And as members and as authority, we as a board have a duty to public money, to be efficient, and also to give good value for money. We have a duty to our staff as employers to make sure that their working conditions are both productive and appropriate. And so I think that is the background to the deliberations that have brought us to where we are. And in answer to the question, no final decision has yet been made, but the work that we do have has led us to indicate that this would be perhaps the most efficient and the most cost-effective way forward, which is why the authority has continued to do this. The assessment of the appropriateness of the site is not for this authority, it's for North Yorkshire Council, who's the local planning authority of that place, and we as applicants will be guided and bound by their decision when the planning application is considered. That will include a public consultation process, it will include expert advice, and a revisiting of all the issues that you've raised about the allocation of the site. But until we have all that information, then it would be wrong for this authority to close its mind to other options. We are still pursuing efficiency and good value for money to the best that we can. So thank you for your questions. Oh, essentially, my iPad's died after all that.
Camille.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we'll just hang on a minute while you get going.
Chair, I'm going to leave the room for a minute, but I'm going to come back and declare an interest. Just one second.
Are we call it without you?
Yes, it's 1/3 of all members, including the relevant composition. So we, I think 7/8 is the quorum.
So,
Local authority.
okay. So on to item 6 then. Members are reminded of the responsibility to declare the nature of any prejudicial or personal interests before the item is considered. There's a form on the table just to help officers understand the nature of such an interest if you have one. And then on to item 7. Oh, sorry, George.
So at the last NPA meeting, I declared the fact that I represent Helmsley on North Yorkshire Council, and obviously I have been campaigning on the issue about the property HQ. So that's related to agenda item number 10.
Okay, thanks, George. So, item 7 is External Audit Strategy Memorandum and Introduction to Forvis Mazers. Have I got that right? And we have, just finding.
Thanks, Jay. Handing straight over to me, that's fine. Good morning. I'll say Forvis Mazars. There's probably lots of dispute over the how it's pronounced. I pronounce
We'll
it
get
in a
used to
northeast
it.
accent.
Yeah, go ahead, Gavin.
So my name's Gavin Barker. I'm an audit director with Forvis Mazars LLP, who have been appointed as your external auditors for the 2023-24 financial years and years following that. I've got 35 years of experience as a public sector auditor. I know I don't look old enough, and it actually feels like more than 35 years, particularly in recent times. It's sort of been a really challenging sector to work in. So I've always worked with public sector bodies, local authorities, NHS trusts, police, fire, transport bodies, combined authorities, over those 35 years, but never national park authorities until now. And I'm actually engagement lead for 3 national park authorities, so not just yourselves, but also the Yorkshire Dales and Northumberland National Park authorities. And it's sort of a pleasure really to be working with a sector that does such important and good work, which is a key driver for me in the work that I do as an external auditor. Also joining us on the screen is Gaurav Gandhi in Leeds at the moment, and he's the audit manager who's been appointed to work on your audit. Your current auditor, your previous auditor, GT, still haven't sort of signed off on the 22-23 financial statements because they're still waiting for pension fund auditor assurance from Deloitte, who are for 22-23 the auditors of the North Yorkshire Pension Fund. So I wanted to start by outlining the result of some consultations. They're included, sort of summarised in our report on page 5. These are consultations that started in February this year, and they were started really with the backdrop of the local audit framework being subject to what is essentially being described as market failure. So there's been a huge backlog in the delivery of audit opinions. And I think at the time the consultation started, there was sort of between 700-800 outstanding audit opinions across the country, across England. And the idea of the consultations was to reset the system, to get it back on a sort of even footing going forward. So some proposals were put forward in February. It was meant to be a quick consultation and then sort of be enacted, but it wasn't. There was an announcement of a general election, and surprisingly enough, pushing this through at the last minute wasn't on the agenda for the previous government. So it's been picked up by the new government when it's come into power, and on the 31st of July, it's essentially put in place the same measures, but a couple of the dates are significantly different, which has sort of ramifications for the audit firms trying to work hard to sort of deliver in this new world that we operate in. So the overall idea is to reset the system over 5 years to get back to audits being signed off by the end of November. That's not expected to happen till 2027 and 2028. There's no suggestion that we'll go back to the previous situation where audits were completed at the end of July or the end of September. But the attempt is to get it back to being able to complete them by the 30th of November. The method that's been put in place to achieve this is something called backstop dates. So the 2 backstop dates that are particularly pertinent to yourselves are the backstop dates for the 2022-23 audits and the backstop date for the one that we'll be auditing of 23-24. So the backstop dates and the sort of measures have now been sort of they're being laid before Parliament to bring this into effect. Mean that the audit must be completed by those dates. And if the auditor can't complete their work by those dates, they must still report what they have done and the position that they've reached. And the expectation is that this will include disclaimed audit opinions. So what any authority wants is an unqualified audit opinion, which gives an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. There are other types of audit opinion. You can get a qualified audit opinion, and there are a couple of different types of those. So one of them is an except for opinion, where basically the auditor says that they're happy with everything except for some specific issues. You can get an adverse qualified opinion, which is that the issues that have been identified as part of the audit are all persuasive, all sort of persuasive, and that they sort of undermine the sort of quality of the financial statements and the information in the financial statements. But there's another thing called a disclaimed opinion, which hasn't been used that often. I haven't seen one in my sort of 35 years. And a disclaimed opinion is that the auditor hasn't got enough information to give an opinion. So effectively, the audit doesn't give you an opinion on the financial statements. And this is a sort of worst case scenario for any authority to receive such an opinion. In the consultations, it was said that it would be made clear when those disclaimed opinions were due to whether they were due to just auditors not being able to complete their work, or they were due to underlying problems with the financial arrangements of an authority. So the backstop dates that you face are the 13th of December with GT to conclude your 2022-23 audit. We're hoping that they can conclude that audit and give you an unqualified opinion. They are waiting for the pension fund auditor assurance, but that will be our starting point before we consider 23-24. We've got to see the outcome of GT's work on 22-23. So whenever a new auditor takes over on an audit, they have to review the work of the previous auditor to ensure that they're happy as the new auditor, that there is assurance over the brought forward balances, the opening balances, and the work that was done by the previous auditor. We will be making arrangements to review GT's work, but we're just holding off at the moment until they complete that work and issue their final opinion. They have to do it before the 13th of December. So we're hoping that they'll be able to do that, but there remains a risk that they might not be able to, and we'll have to face those issues as and when they arise. We've then got to complete the 23-24 audit by the end of February. So we've identified resources to undertake the audit work that we need to do in November and early December of this year, with a view to being able to complete in January/February and ahead of the backstop date. It is a challenging timeline. As an audit firm, we've moved from a situation where we thought we had until the end of May 25 to complete all of our 23-24 audits, because that was the date in the previous consultation. But the date of having to complete by 20th of February is putting pressure on us as an audit firm, and all engagement leads are fighting hard to sort of maintain the resources that have been identified to complete their own audits. So we have got the resources we need in place. We do need your previous auditor to be able to complete the 22-23 audit, and then we do have the resources to complete 23-24. So I'm not wanting to raise alarm, but I just sort of wanted to highlight the risks that are in this system at the moment. I do get a sense, Chair, that some people may perhaps want to ask questions at this point. So I'm quite happy to pause there if that is the case.
Yeah, it's good. We've got some questions. I'll go to Heather first. Heather, then
Yeah,
George.
I appreciate. I mean, obviously the pressure's going to be on. I mean, can I just on another matter as a drive from the question? Is this only affecting authorities? I mean, or is this company accounts as a new laws on that as well? I mean, it's going to be pressures all the way around. Or is it just particular authorities where this has been new governance has taken place?
Yes, these new arrangements only apply to the local audit framework, which relates to local authorities, police, fire and related bodies like yourselves. So it doesn't apply to the NHS system. It doesn't apply to the private sector system.
Okay, well that's one thing. That's one good point, but who knows what can happen next? Does it affect charities as well, to a degree? No, okay. So therefore the pressures are on from what you've just said. I was trying to get the full implications of UK-wide, not about here, but because we're all under the same problem. And I think you're not all going to get it, because just the workload that you have, unless you're suddenly going to be able to get new staff in that are fully qualified, I mean, the problem is, of course, fines, and the next issue is, yes, there'll be fines, but we're not going to be alone in this. But is it going to cost the authority, as an authority, obviously its implications, the set fees or whatever, is what's the cost implications for us as an authority? Thank you.
Okay, there's quite a lot to unpack in that question.
Yeah, but that's exactly what we're talking about.
Some audits that my firm does, Forvis Mazars, will be subject to the backstop and will get disclaimed opinions. You're not on that list. We're striving to complete it. Where we do issue a disclaimed opinion, we won't charge the fee for the work that hasn't been done. That's an important principle, and that's going to be enforced by public sector audit appointments who manages all the contracts. We have a list of sort of criteria where we would consider a backstop. One of those criteria is where we're taking on an audit from a previous auditor, and that auditor has disclaimed the opinion. That is one category where we would consider just moving to disclaim the 23-24 opinion, because it's pointless us trying to do something we can't do, because if where an opinion has been disclaimed in the prior year, there's a lot of extra work to do. We wouldn't be able to do it. Another one of our criteria is where the accounts haven't been yet produced for an authority, and that's not the case in your position. You've produced your accounts in good time, but not every authority has produced its accounts yet, because there are problems not just in the audit sector but in the sort of local government sector as well. Those are the sort of main criteria. I suppose another one is where we've experienced problems in the past with organisations not being responsive to our queries. So I can think of one that we're proposing to backstop that falls into that category, because we don't want to do all the sort of chasing around that we've had to do previously and not get anywhere. So that's another sort of category that we consider. But I think I must emphasise you're not on the list for disclaim, but there are risks. There are risks, whatever happens with your 22-23 audit and whether that's concluded and disclaimed or not. And the other risk that we face is as we get closer and closer to that deadline, there is a risk that audit work slips. There then has to be a reprioritisation of work based on what can realistically be achieved by the 28th of February, and then resources might be taken off audits if it's sort of considered they can't be completed. To mitigate that risk here, we have the time booked in for November and early December to conclude all the substantive work on your accounts. We need good cooperation from management to help us do the work that we need to do, and to do it sort of efficiently and quickly. And I've got no doubts about those arrangements, but those are the sort of risks that are in the system as we move. I've never experienced a situation where the auditor has to complete their work by a specific date. An auditor normally completes their work when they've finished it, and I can sort of see why the measures are being taken to try and reset the system. But I think there are a number of sort of maybe perhaps unintended consequences of going down this particular route. So that's a really good airing of the issues, but I'm quite happy to take any more questions if anybody has them on that.
George, and then
Thank you for this appreciated, very comprehensive summary of the situation we are facing as an authority. It affects other local authorities and, of course, North Yorkshire Council. These NPA meetings always coincide with the audit committee meetings of North Yorkshire Council, and as a result, I might have to leave earlier to attend the audit committee later on. But on the website, there is a comprehensive update as well about the audit situation that's facing North Yorkshire Council and the legacy councils. North Yorkshire Council's auditor is also Mazars, so I'm going to be meeting with one of your colleagues later today. But I just want to place on the record our thanks for you thinking proactively and deciding now to allocate additional resources in this year, November, December, I think you mentioned, so that you are striving to get everything sorted by the February deadline. That's very important, it's appreciated, and hopefully everything will go as planned.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, George. Jane?
Thank you. I agree with everything George says there. My first meeting this time last year, we were waiting for the pension. Was that for the year before, or was for that this year?
For the year before. Yeah.
So in other words, this pension issue seems to be something that is holding us up annually, is what I'm saying. And therefore, perhaps if this is an annual thing, is there an alternative way round? Because if this is the one thing that's holding up, is it the only thing, am I right, Peter, that's basically the only thing holding up us having us being able to be fully audited?
Yeah, that's right. So we're fully audited by Grant Thornton many months ago now. And
Yes.
We've been waiting for a number of months for this pension assurance work from Deloitte, which hopefully is forthcoming. But
well, this is it. This is my fifth meeting, if you see what I mean.
Grant Thornton have informed us that there's no other way around being able to conclude the audit without that assurance from the auditor of the pension fund.
Therefore, what I'm questioning is, if this is becoming a regular problem, how do we solve this problem to make sure that we, going forward, don't have this as an issue for our new auditors to deal with?
Thank you. I'm actually waiting for Deloitte's assurance as well for the North Yorkshire Pension Fund for a sort of few clients that I've got in North Yorkshire. So I'm quite familiar with the sort of issues, and we've been promised it again, that it's just a couple of weeks ago, but that is probably for the fourth or fifth time that we've had that sort of promise. I'm not really sure what the issues are, but one thing that I can say going forward is that the North Yorkshire audit is changing hands, as they mentioned here. That North Yorkshire audit is going to Forvis Mazars. My colleague at Forvis Mazars, who happens to be my line manager, will be responsible for the pension fund audit next year. So if there are delays next year, you don't have to look very far in terms of responsibility for them. We always strive to complete pension fund audits as an absolute priority in Forvis Mazars. Ourselves and others have experienced more and more difficulties with doing that, as the sort of arrangements around sort of pension funds are increasingly complex, as the standards of audit work that are required by our regulators, the Financial Reporting Council, become increasingly onerous on what we have to do. So waiting for pension fund assurance is not something restricted to North Yorkshire. It's quite common, and it's a sort of big issue everywhere. And it's also a big issue that will impact on the 23-24 audits, because we need that pension fund auditor assurance before the 28th of February. And given sort of past performance in a number of areas, that is going to be challenging. And also because pension fund figures are considered to be sort of really important in a set of financial statements, even though they're just a snapshot at a point in time based on lots of assumptions. But sort of technically they're considered to be something that's all pervasive to the accounts. So they are something that might lead to a disclaimer if you don't get that assurance, rather than a qualification. There's different views on whether that's the right thing to do, but the sort of technical purists seem to be in the ascendancy at the moment in that respect. So yes, it's a wide problem. We'll be the ones to blame next year, but I'm not sure how we can deliver the pension fund assurance at Forvis Mazars in North Yorkshire by the end of February if the current auditor of the pension fund hasn't yet been able to deliver it. So that's going to be a challenge in itself.
It sounds like it's not just us in that situation. Maybe second last question from Malcolm, and I'll go to Colin to finish up.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. No, thanks for explaining all those problems to us. A couple of things. One, just a general comment. As you're aware, I mean, Pete and our previous auditors work very closely together, and I'm sure you'll work very closely with Pete. And so we always, so far, managed to get things done subject to the pension issue reasonably well ahead of time. And I know it's always quite a major job to do that, but I'm sure that sort of working relationship will continue with yourselves. And just on the specifics, you mentioned that you're waiting for the final audit before you can look at some of the figures. But I mean, all the figures are there. I mean, Pete's agreed with our auditors. So couldn't you start looking at those figures now rather than waiting until the actual tick, which depends on Deloitte?
Yeah.
So that you're fully aware of exactly, I mean, everything's, as far as I'm concerned, when we endorse them, so everything's hunky-dory. I would hope that you would, when you see the figures that the previous auditors have, that they'll agree that everything's okay.
Yeah.
And I don't think you need to, well, I suppose I'm asking, why do you need to wait to December in order to do that, or can you just elaborate a bit for me?
Yeah, can. It's a good question that helps me sort of explain a few things. So GT, your previous auditor, who we've never had any problems working with, to sort of feel to us to be sort of like-minded to Forbes Mazars in the way they go about things. I think in reality they started the work on this audit earlier because there was sort of resource to do it earlier. We haven't been able to identify the resources until November. So we'll be doing the bulk of the work in November, and the first couple of weeks in December we wanted to blast things. So we won't necessarily wait until they've issued, the GT have issued their audit opinion on 22-23. We desperately hope they'll have done that long before we start in November, but that's not what's holding us up in terms of starting. What's holding up us in terms of starting, in all honesty, is our own resources and how we're deploying them on the various sort of audits that we've got. So we wouldn't hold it up for that. We have got the resources in sufficient time. We do plan to work really closely with Pete and his team, and hopefully we're sort of already doing that. And we hope it's going to be a sort of relationship like the one that you've had with GT. That's what we always aspire to. We get sort of good feedback from all of our existing clients on our approach and our sort of the way that we work with our clients to achieve what is a common goal to sort of complete the audit. But we're in a difficult position. We've got lots of audits to deliver in a short timeline. To be perfectly frank, we've prioritised other audits above this National Park Authority, but we've took you in at a time when we think we can blast through it because you're a relatively small organisation and do everything that we need to do. But that's about prioritisation of resources when we've got lots of audits across the North East, North Yorkshire, and elsewhere across the country. Thank you.
Last question from Colin.
Thanks, Chair. It was, well, half similar to what Malcolm's just come up with. We have delivered these the accounts as well as Deloitte's pension fund in November every year up until this year, where they're holding back for some reason. Is there anything, and I know you have the same problem with different authorities, whatever, but what is being said to Deloitte to make them finish on time and not hold everybody else up? Because it seems it's them that's holding the whole system up. And are they going to be fined for not doing it, or what is the problem from their perspective that they're holding the whole situation up altogether?
There's no fines in the system, rightly or wrongly. That's the way it is. So I'm clear on that. That's really a question for them to answer, but I understand sort of anecdotally that they had some problems with their own sort of resourcing of the North Yorkshire Pension Fund audit. I think they might have had some turnover of staff, but that was provided as an explanation quite a long time ago. So I'm not really sure exactly why. We keep getting promised it's not very far away. As I say, we've got a recent promise that it will be within the next couple of weeks, but I don't know. I don't have direct information. That's from third parties that it's close.
Sorry, who can put a bullet behind them then to get them to do the work, so that all the authorities aren't stood back waiting. You're waiting for them to come forward to get on with your year's work, where, you know, it's the same situation for all the authorities, just being held up from one firm.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a use of bullets, but the sort of the sector network led by the National Audit Office would probably be the most appropriate place. And I know that pension fund assurance is meant to be absolutely prioritised. I've got to say that we've waited for it at North Yorkshire for longer than I've ever known a wait to be. So we've had problems waiting for pension fund assurance where we've got it sort of at the end of January or the end of March the following year, but sort of to be at where are we now? Sort of towards the end of September and not have it, that is pretty unprecedented in my experience. But we can only ask Deloitte when they're going to provide it. So I don't really.
I think one of the points I would just like to add with respect to Deloitte, and I've just looked it online to make sure it's all public information. It was announced a while back that Deloitte did exit the local government audit market, and they didn't tender for this round of local government audit. So they are now in the process of completing their previous work, but in terms of the new cycle, they have exited the market.
Useful to know. Okay, well, we've had a really good discussion. Nobody's asked the magic question about fees, have they? So it leaves me to. Did you have that? Sorry, yeah.
To be fair, Chair, we're on. I was going to say, to be fair, Chair, we're only on page 5.
Sure.
I'll speed through the rest of it if you like, but I was going to now talk about what our audit approach is and what our responsibilities are.
Yeah, if you could crack on.
And I will mention fees. I will mention fees briefly. So the engagement responsibilities for our audit is set out on page 6. Our main areas of work are to give an opinion on the financial statements, which is what we've been talking about, and to report on what's often described as value for money arrangements. So the arrangements the authority has in place to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources. It's worth mentioning that the backstop doesn't apply to value for money arrangements. So auditors are required, even if they disclaim an audit opinion, to report on value for money arrangements. The thing I like to point out on that slide, because it covers other things such as the arrangements in place that you have to prevent and detect fraud and corruption, the internal control arrangements in place, is all of the responsibilities, the primary responsibilities for everything, rests with the authority and with management. So management and the authority are primarily responsible for everything that takes place within the authority, as you would understand, and our role is to report our findings based upon the work that we undertake. Just moving on to, we've talked really about the timeline. We're doing our work primarily in November and early December. I must just mention significant audit risks. So significant audit risks are not significant risks in the sense that we suspect something is wrong with this authority or its arrangements. They're areas of risk due to their nature, really. So the 3 significant risks that we've identified on your audit are 3 that we really include as significant risks on all audits. Could that not have been timed for when we were discussing audit fees, I wonder to myself. So the first significant risk is management override of controls. So that's the risk that exists in any organisation, that however good the internal controls that you have in place, management is in a unique position that it could override those controls if it chose to. So the audit response to that is to carry out specific testing to ensure that that hasn't happened. And we remain professionally sceptical at all times, even where we have sort of good working relationships with authorities, we carry out our work with due diligence. The two other significant risk areas are around the pension liability or the pension asset and the valuation of property, plant and equipment. Now, they're significant risks for similar reasons. They're very large numbers in the financial statements. They are numbers that are subject to estimation risk because they're based on estimates, and they also are reliant on third parties, such as the actuary in the case of the pension disclosures, and usually an external valuer in relation to the valuation of property, plant and equipment. And minor changes in assumptions used can have a significant impact on those disclosures in the financial statements. So those are the areas that we've identified as significant risks. We haven't identified any specific significant risks relating to the authority. On value for money arrangements, we set out in our plan that we consider the three areas that are within the specified framework for value for money arrangements, which are financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. And to summarise that last one, it's really how the authority uses information about its costs and performance to improve the way it manages and delivers its services. So that's the scope of our value for money arrangements work. Now, because your auditor for 22-23 hasn't reported on value for money for 22-23, we haven't got that report to call on. We anticipate that we will get that report, which will be useful information to us. The other thing that we've done is we've asked management for a self-assessment of those arrangements. We haven't got that self-assessment back yet, but there's still plenty of time for it to be provided to us. And the idea of that is to get an understanding of what the authority sees as being the important measures that it has in place around those areas of financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. But we'll also carry out our own sort of work on this and report accordingly when we come to do our reporting. The next section of our report was audit fees. I imagine it's an increase, the 41,766 fee. I imagine it could be twice the previous fee or thereabouts. That is the result of the latest national procurement, which was run by Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, which carries out the procurement for most, but not all, authorities in this space. We can't really explain it. We were a bidder in that process. That's the outcome of the procurement. We don't necessarily get the whole of that fee because prices are equalised out across the country. But that is the fee. We wouldn't expect at the current time to vary from that fee, and we wouldn't plan to carry out any non-audit work here. We'll just be carrying out the audit, and then so that's our core focus. Moving swiftly on, but you can come back to fees. Can I just finish and then maybe come back to them? Go ahead. Confirmation of our independence. Our independence is really important to us in any organisation that we audit. We want to be able to report without fear or favour. We haven't identified any sort of conflicts of interest, any potential conflicts, and we believe ourselves to be independent and can sort of report objectively on what we find as part of your audit. There's also a whole section on materiality, which is really important. That sets out our levels of materiality, which are relatively low, which are based on the sort of size of the authority, and that determines our testing strategy. But we look at every item of account, not just in terms of its value, but in terms of its nature. But that sort of section on materiality sets out where we would report to you unadjusted misstatements, and where we would report to you if there was any proposed sort of misstatement that management didn't want to change during the process. That concludes what I want to say. Sorry it's taken a long time, but it has been a good debate. I know you want to ask me about fees.
I think you've explained the fee situation. I think obviously it's disappointing that the fees continue to go up because it takes away from the work that we do delivering our purposes, which I spoke about earlier. But I think my real question is, did you call it materiality? It's the question of proportionateness of the fee and the work compared to the amount of money that we spend, as opposed to a combined authority or something like that. And I know it's not within your jurisdiction to do anything about that, but it does seem increasingly that proportionately our audits are a lot from our budget. I just wondered if you could comment on that.
I don't think this helps, but all the fees have just about doubled. So it's sort of proportionally increased everywhere, if you sort of see what I mean. So it is meant to take into account the sort of size and nature of the authority. That's sort of part of PSA's role when setting fees. I can't really comment on any more than that because I'm not really accountable for the fees. I'm accountable for delivering your audit.
Heather.
Yeah, really go back. I've got a loud enough voice, my husband tells me. Yeah, generally, you know, in corporate stuff, it's on turnover, isn't it? But on so is it related to what our budget is? You're saying that, and it's doubled. That's a problem I was going to ask. How much percentage has it gone up? It's doubled? Is that across the board? You know, it's not just authorities. I mean, is this generated by all accountants' fees? Oh,
Yeah, I can come in if you want, specifically around our fees. So last year, Grant Thornton's were, I think, around the 20,000 mark. So we have seen it go up probably by more than 100%, but it's not unexpected. I think we were told a year or two ago that when this refresh of the audit came up, all fees nationwide would increase probably by that proportion. So it's certainly not just us, it's a broad issue across the sector. Now, I think from my personal point of view, I think we spend a lot of time on things like land, buildings, property valuations and pension valuations that may be disproportionate to an organisation our size. But I think that's more of an issue for, as a nation, audit standards-wise to look at in terms of organisational size, rather than the auditors or ourselves who are not necessarily in control of that.
Yeah, so it's within our budget. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. We budgeted for this increase.
That's fine. That's the next thing. Thank you.
Can I just come back on one thing? I don't think you can really say that private sector audit fees are determined by turnover. They'll be determined by lots of things.
Well,
it's sort of it's a free marketplace.
Where,
yeah.
Having been there, thank you. That's really,
Thank you.
Lovely. Well, we've had a really good discussion, and it's great to welcome you, Gavin, as our new auditors. I won't say anything about expense, but it's a challenge for everybody. I just wonder whether, I mean, obviously for ourselves, there's not much we can do about it, but when we deal with National Parks England and other small authorities, you know, the proportion we spend on audit as opposed to what we deliver in our public duties has gone up, hasn't it? The recommendation is that members welcome Forbes Mazars as the authority's new external auditor and note the contents of the report in the appendix. Happy to do that?
Yep. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Gavin.
Thank you. I'm going to dash off now because any of you want.
Okay. So, where have we got to? So, oh yeah.
On my agenda,
I think so. So, on to item 8, which is the North York Moors Trust Strategy Review, page 49. And Tom's going to do this for us.
Yeah, now for something completely different, as they say. So I'm presenting this to you today as Chief Executive, but also as Chair of the North York Moors National Park Trust. And the purpose of the report really is just inform members about the discussions that have been taking place amongst the trustees of the North York Moors Trust around its future strategy, but also the governance implications of all of that. I should stress from the very outset the Trust is an independent charity. It makes its own decisions and it's free to make its own decisions, but there is a very, very close relationship with the National Park Authority, which is explained a little bit further in the paper, and 3 of the other trustees who represent the National Park Authority on the board of the trust are here with me today as well. A number of national park authorities have relationships with trusts or foundations with whom they work very closely. In our case, the North York Moors National Park Trust was established 9 years ago in 2015 as an independent charity, partly with a view to leveraging its charitable status to bring in income in the form of donations and other funding that the authority as a public body isn't able to access in order to deliver management plan objectives and the collective statutory purposes of national parks. And in recent years, the Trust has sought to, I think, develop its identity and develop its own resources. So it employed for the first time its own executive director, James Metcalf, who some of you will know, is here in the audience. Here in the audience today, has been with the Trust for about the last 18 months in that role, and has also sought to develop its own independent brand profile in the form of the brand refresh that took place earlier on this year. And in the report, it explains a couple of the active projects that the Trust is heavily involved in. The Birds on the Edge project, which the authority is a key delivery partner for, but is held by the Trust with the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The work on a really new exciting project called Stepping Stones to Nature, which is working with 2 schools in quite deprived areas of Teesside, looking to increase the life skills of children in relation to nature. And also a project where the Trust partnered closely with the National Park Authority and indeed the Yorkshire Dales in developing a nature prescription for GPs to prescribe, covering specific prescriptions that people can take up that's relevant to the North York Moors, and members will be aware of that from presentations that Heather McNiff and others have done previously. So earlier on this year, the Trust started a strategic review of its activities with a view to, I think, first of all, trying to identify the direction that as a charity it wants to head in and prioritise in terms of its work. It has a set of objects that are on the Charity Commission website and in its governing document, its Articles of Association, that define its parameters, and they're quite broadly framed and not entirely dissimilar to the statutory purposes of national parks. But there's been a feeling amongst trustees that we need to be clear about the focus for the charity, so that we're not trying to do everything and we have something that's really relevant and specific that the Trust can really take forward under its own steam. And as part of that discussion, trustees identified that focusing on trying to do things that lift the health of people and nature through connecting people through art, recreation and education was a key part. There's an awful lot of conservation work taking place in the national park, and a not insignificant amount of funding for conservation work. And although that's still relevant to the Trust's objects, we really wanted to be more people-centric in terms of the work. The second part of the discussion was around the relationship between the National Park Authority and the Trust. The Trust really values the strong partnership that it has with the NPA. It needs the NPA as a delivery partner. It recognises that working with the NPA carries a level of efficiency in terms of some of the services that the Trust itself is unable to provide as a relatively small charity. But nonetheless, it feels it's important that it becomes a bit more independent and more detached in relation to its activities and its identity. And as a consequence of that, the Trust has undertaken review of its own governance and the arrangements that were put in place when the charity was founded back in 2015, which have some bearing on that relationship with the authority. So the first of those was about to try and slightly broaden the remit of the charity without compromising the existing Articles of Association, to allow the charity to work a little bit more deliberately and expressly in communities that surround the national park, as opposed to just those within it. And secondly, to ensure that the public health and well-being is recognised as an object. It's kind of there, but it's a bit coded in the way that the objects are framed at the moment, so it's about being a little bit more explicit around that. The second was to remove what I think is a constitutional anomaly, which is that as Chief Executive of the National Park Authority, I'm required to be a trustee in perpetuity, and I'm also required to be the chair of the National Park Trust in perpetuity. which is represents something of conflict of interest, I think, on both sides, but also is unusual and atypical in relation to charity governance. And so, as a group of trustees, we think it's important to move away from that and adopt a much more normal approach to the chairmanship and governance of the charity. And then the final change in relation to governance that has a bearing on the authority is, at the moment, the authority nominates, because the trust appoints its own trustees, it nominates 4 trustees to sit on the board of trustees of the National Park, including myself. So periodically we appoint trustees or nominate trustees from the National Park Authority. Clive's term of office as a trustee would normally expire later on this year, having served his 2 terms of 3 years, which is the maximum that trustees can serve on the National Park Trust. And on account of that, and on account of the desire to try and create a little bit more independence, but also to create a bit more space to bring in some independent expertise and experience onto the board of trustees, the trustees would like to reduce the number of authority appointments from 4 down to 3. So I think, Chair, that summarises the main changes. They've not been accepted by the trustees, other than informally, as trustees, we think they're the right direction of travel. The trustees will take a decision on a new governing document at their December trustees meeting. And so there was a feeling, because of the proximity and the relationship with the authority, that the authority should be cited on the changes that the trust is looking to make, and that the authority feel comfortable with those changes as well. So I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thanks, Tom. Any questions?
Yeah. Yes, Chair.
Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Tom. That's a lot of explanation for a short report. Can I just ask, please, and I'm sure you have you taken advice on the changes of governance? Because that conflict of interest for you, that post, not you personally, the post of, must have been established for a reason in the first place in 2015. So just checking that you've taken advice on that, and everybody's happy that moving away to what is considered to be a more normal arrangement is. I'm just interested in that point, Tom, please.
Yeah, the trust hasn't taken independent legal advice, but has taken advice from Community First Yorkshire, which is a body that works closely with the third sector, and in particular charities across North Yorkshire, on its governance arrangements, which has been really helpful in informing the process. So, for example, one of the considerations was whether there'd be any material advantage in moving from being a charitable company, which is the status of the trust at the moment, into being what's known as a charitable incorporated organisation, CIO, which is a slightly simpler form of reporting. I think on the basis of that advice, we've concluded as a group of trustees that remaining as a charitable company is probably the most efficient way of conducting our business going forward. But it included that discussion around trustees. There is no right or wrong answer on all of this, and if you look across the other national park charities, which we did as part of the process of the governance review, there are a wide range of arrangements out there. There are some, like sort of Pembrokeshire Coast Trust, which have a number of trustees appointed by the National Park Authority, but not the chair. There are some, like the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, where the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority just makes one appointment to the Board of Trustees of the Dales Millennium Trust. So a wide range of relationships and no right or wrong way. I think previously as well, certainly conversations I've had with Pete before, is that our previous external auditors from the authority point of view have flagged that question mark about the relationship with the trust. And although we've built firewalls into the way that the trust works with the authority, I can't overcome that firewall that I'm constitutionally the chair of the National Park Trust.
Right, thank you very much.
Go ahead, Jane.
From my limited experience being involved in trusts, and trusts that are involved again with people and authorities that have needs but then have conflict of interest, I think this is a very good thing to do. I think it is also particularly good for you as chair of it, as in chief executive of here, not to have those conflicts of interest. And to me, going forward, that would be constitutionally a good way to go, and particularly with the governance and the governance rules in charities, I think it's the right thing that we would be doing. So I think, all in all, that it's a very good thing that you're doing it.
Malcolm?
Yeah, thank you. I think when the trust was set up, just for members that weren't around at that time, the arrangement, the current arrangement, was seen as a positive, in that clearly we were setting up a new trust. By definition, the trust had total responsibility for itself. And looking around how trusts in other authorities work, there's been some good and some bad examples. So it was felt that the arrangements that were set up were appropriate for that time. And I think all the members of the authority agreed with that, and that's why it went forward that way. I mean, we're now in a position where we've had the trust operating for a number of years, and the relationship between the authority and the trust has developed, in my view, in a really positive way. So I don't see a problem in the sort of change that the trust are now suggesting. And in any case, they are now independent, so that they can, I'm very pleased that they've come to us and asked for our advice. You don't have to. Having said so, that's kind of a bit of background to what you were asking about. Can I just ask just how things are going? I think because as you say, the trust has had two kind of roles in some ways. One is to get its own money in and do things, and the other one is to get money that the authority themselves could be very active in spending, but wouldn't be able to get it themselves. And there's some examples of that happening as well. And I think it's really important that those two activities continue. I'm sure they will do. But I'd just like reassurance that these changes won't make any difference to that. And indeed that our officers are continuing to identify any good examples of funds that the trust can identify and get for essentially our officers to spend. And that I'm putting it fairly broadly, but that's kind of the way that it has been working. But I think that, and the reciprocal part of that is that, as the report says, as this authority, we do provide significant support to the trust. It's a small organisation, and if you can use our officers for finance and admin, that's, in my view, money very well spent. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously on the agenda an update from Colin a little bit later on the agenda, but I suppose from my point of view as chair of the trust, I think the charity's doing really well. There's always scope for development, but I think the relationship with the authority is really strong at the moment. In my chief exec's report, I flagged the More Connected project, which is as members will be aware, a really significant and important bringing together of a number of project ideas into a collective, of which the trust is a key cooperator with the National Park Authority, and able to lend some advantage as a charitable body to that collective project. So that's just one example. And I think as a group of trustees, we feel really confident that we have a project portfolio and project pipeline, particularly in relation to education, engagement, public health and well-being, that I think it can be owned by the trust independently, but also where the authority's experience and expertise as a delivery partner will likely come into fruition. One of the key challenges right the way across the charitable sector, and it was one of the things that we considered as trustees in our strategy review, is how to bring in donations and other unrestricted income that ultimately ensure that you've got healthy reserves as a charity to continue to operate. The Trust's got great reserves. If anything, part of its challenge is spending those reserves down to a level at which they're seen by the Charity Commission as being more sustainable. But also, that's not a long-term way of managing a charity. You need to ensure that you've got durable, unrestricted income coming in either through donations or legacies or some other form. And that remains a challenge. The Trust has grown some of its unrestricted income, but would still be at a position where, like a number of other charities, it's probably not fully servicing its direct costs. I think that the trustees are very, very keen that strategically it has to become self-financing in terms of its ability to make sure that it's bringing in unrestricted income, and that's a key area of focus and attention for trustees.
Can I just mention two other very brief points, Jim? One is I think it's important that if we're going down to 3, then that will presumably be 1 officer and 2 members. And I think it's important that the officer is a senior officer, and that senior officer has the commitment to go to all the meetings. And when I was on the trust, I found it very useful to have, as it was then, the chief executive there, who's got an overview of what's happening in the authority and the authority to comment on those sorts of things. So I think that's the main point I'm going to say. Thanks.
Yeah, so thanks for that thought, Tom. I haven't had a lot to do with the trust in its work, but I remember its inception, and it's definitely moving now to be, you know, an independent force for the good in our place, which is what it should be. So I also think, you know, there was some nervousness about when it was set up, which is maybe why those sort of strings were attached. Maybe a bit of a halfway house, although it's absolutely right that the chief executive shouldn't be the chair. As Malcolm says, you know, having some senior connection with the authority on the board of the trust seems sensible. Whether that needs to be written into its articles or whether that can just be taken, we'd leave for them because we're only being consulted. But I think, you know, having a senior connection with the board of the trust and the office of the authority does seem good sense. So maybe that might be a plea or a suggestion, you know, from this debate, that remains in some form. Otherwise, if you're happy to take the recommendation that members note and endorse the outcome of the trust strategic review and the changes to its governance the trustees are aiming to implement. It's we're being consulted as opposed to having a decision. We could give that our blessing. Yep. All happy? Thank you. So I'm going to take one more item, and then we're going to have a quick comfort break. So we're on to item 10 now, which is it's item 9. It's proposed reform of the National Planning Policy Framework and changes to the planning system. So Paul's going to take us through this.
Good morning, members. As Jim says, this is concerning the authority's response to the current consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework. First thing to say is that the 2 paragraphs in there covering national parks are unchanged. So it doesn't directly affect us, but it might indirectly affect us. But it's really around the new government's growth agenda, all the changes. So in particular, they've reintroduced mandatory housing targets for local planning authorities, but not national parks. And they've pretty much doubled the existing delivery numbers, up to 370,000 homes. Changes to green belt. We don't have any green belt around here. There's some in York, but some way. Particular references to growth industries and also changes on the green energy side as well. But just to stress, it doesn't directly affect the paragraphs on national parks. Hang on. So in particular, the response basically picks up a few things. Firstly, on the housing numbers, they've changed the way the algorithm works in terms of how local planning authorities are distributed their housing numbers. What they've done is they've changed it from household formation being the basis to dwelling stock. And basically what that's done is that's really upped the numbers for rural areas. So in North Yorkshire, it's doubled the housing target in North Yorkshire. And in Rugcar and Cleveland, which is a very small part of the national park, it's got the highest increase in the country. So these areas were depopulating, and because they've changed it to dwelling stock, it's really upped the numbers for rural areas. It's not particularly an issue. It's an issue for this national park, but also a lot of the other national parks as well. So Somerset, Northumberland, Yorkshire Dales, Lake District, all their numbers are seeing significant increases in the neighbouring authorities. Those targets are now mandatory, so local planning authorities will have to plan for them, unless there are local constraints, and the consultation does say national parks may be one of the constraints to justify a low number, but that's not actually in the NPPF text. So one of the things we said in our response is it ought to be explicit in the NPPF text that national parks might be a reason for a lower number. There's a new emphasis on social rented housing. So over the course of the last 10, 15 years, there's been a real kind of push for housing ownership, and this government's moving back towards social rented a bit more. The other thing that may affect us a bit more is past planning policy under the previous government has pretty much had a ban on offshore wind. You would have to demonstrate full community support. They've rowed back on that in this national park, so we might see some more applications for wind turbine development. We would accept very small scale wind turbine development, but we'll have to look at that policy on our local plan again. Again, I think we signed off an application last week for small wind turbine. So we might see a few more. The other two things that might affect us are planning fees. This government is very keen to make sure that local planning authorities have full cost recovery on planning applications and other fees as well. So they're suggesting doubling householder application fees to £528 to recover costs. They've also asked us what we think ought to also be recovered as a costs. We've suggested two. We've suggested that enforcement costs ought to be recoverable. Some members might recall that a few years back we did attempt to do this and got knocked back by the Ombudsman. But we said that under kind of the polluter pays principle, if you're breaching planning rules, we ought to be able to recover costs. The other one we said, which is open to members to questions on, is whether listed building fees ought to be charged as well. They're quite resource intensive from our point of view to process. Finally, under the last government's policy, we would have been required to produce what's known as an infrastructure levy, setting out what our infrastructure needs would be and how we'd pay for them. That would have been mandatory. They're proposing to roll back on that as well, which we think is good news because we're not in the business of building lots of houses that needs lots of infrastructure. And indeed, a few years back, we kind of looked into a community infrastructure levy and worked out it's probably going to be more costly to actually introduce than it would actually produce in terms of infrastructure, in terms of fees as well. So the proposed responses at Annex 1, but we are questioning the robustness of how they're doing the housing figures. It's not directly an issue for us, but we are saying that in North Yorkshire in particular, it is incredibly challenging to deliver that number. North Yorkshire Council in their response have said the same, and the other national parks are saying the same thing as well, and National Parks England is saying the same thing. We're not remotely opposed to new house building, but we just think by moving things to rural areas in terms of housing numbers, it makes it a lot more challenging. I mentioned earlier we kind of want to say that in the national park setting, national park status might be a reason to have lower numbers. Other than that, we're supporting what I've said in terms of infrastructure levy, social rent, green energy, supporting planning fees, but we particularly welcome views from members on that, and also asking for enforcement activity to be subject to full cost recovery. At which point I think that's the recommendations before you. But happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions? Michelle, better head then.
But, yeah, thanks for the report and thanks for the draft copy of the responses, which is very interesting. Interesting enough, I asked this question twice in North Yorkshire about housing numbers and available geography, because obviously there's two national parks in North Yorkshire. We're a significant part of one part of North Yorkshire, which means there's a limit on available land for mass development, or extensive development of housing. And what's interesting is you've given the response that I would have thought made sense to me, which is that you can't apply a standard calculation across a geography that has a significant percentage. Now, Yorkshire's view was, firstly, they didn't answer. The second time, they just said, oh, well, it might be a bit. Are North Yorkshire making the same representations? Are you clear that you're both actually saying the same thing to the government on this?
Yes.
Good. Because I think it's a really important point. Because particularly if you consider, well, and I think the point is that, as you said, it doesn't directly affect, but clearly there are towns that sit beside which would be potentially done, and that creates huge tension between them and the national park, and then people start looking at this, why is it like this in one bit? So I think it has, and while you're right, it doesn't have direct impact. It does put pressure if other communities are saying we can't find these sites. Somebody somewhere is eventually going to say to the government, why don't you start looking at these places that you're not land building in? And I think there is a potential risk that will happen, because looking at the numbers for North Yorkshire, none of us can see where that land is going to come, given that we've already got ones coming forward that are on the old local plans that are going to take up a significant percentage. What's actually left is actually not that big. And that does concern me, so I think it's something we need to keep a close eye on.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is a third of North Yorkshire's national landscape, and what the revisions are not clear on is what you do in that situation, which is a real issue. So I've explicitly said national parks and national landscapes ought to be a reason why you might want to go for lower figures.
So just before I come to Heather, because it was on exactly that point. So, are we saying that although national parks are exempt from the housing allocation, that is in effect dispersed or transferred to areas of North Yorkshire that are not in the national park? Or is it that the national park is just removed from that equation? It would seem perverse if the whole area of North Yorkshire had a housing equation which had to be delivered outside the national park, but was generated by the areas that are national park. And so I think, what you're saying is that those areas that are national park, the actual generation of housing need in those places is less, and shouldn't be influencing a double whammy outside the national park.
The NPPF changes are entirely silent on that. But having said that, in terms of the algorithm uses dwelling stock as a way of starting calculating the numbers. I think we've got 0.6% of North Yorkshire's dwelling stock. So even if you took the national parks bit out of it, it still presents a massive challenge for North Yorkshire in terms of housing delivery.
Yeah, thanks for this. I mean, obviously, fully support you recommend what you've put in there. Obviously, the enforcement thing in particular, which disappointing that we had to pay it back. Listed buildings, I agree with that. It's part of the planning process. Just can you brief me up? We've got residential on commercial planning applications. I mean, we could be spending a great. Would you? I mean, you'd consider that wind farms, turbines, they would be commercial, wouldn't they? I mean, we could be spending a great deal of time, particularly. Okay, we've got to probably have consultation, and we're going to spend some time probably trying to gather. We might not objections or whatever. I mean, will we get extra funding when we do something like that? I mean, do you think we ought to be looking for some more top-up funding on commercial planning rather than residential?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. The fact is that probably 60% of our applications are householder here, so disproportionately we have a lot of work to do, but we're not getting a fee in for that. Pete well knows that we get a lot of applications, but not great fees. I think what the government's seen that. So in terms of our larger applications and commercial applications, those fees already are quite proportional to the work we do. So you get a lot of money in for major developments, and if it's major like the two mines or Arkiva, we do planning performance agreements where they actually pay exactly the amount of time we spend on doing that. So we don't think major developments and commercial developments are a problem. Householder fees certainly are, because it's a disproportionate amount of time to the money we get in. But Paul's report's talking about, we'd welcome the doubling of fees, because if somebody's paying tens of thousands of pounds for an extension, paying 250 quid or 500 quid isn't going to make a dent in that. But we are saying really small scale householder developments like garden sheds and fences that may be only costing a few £100, those fees should still remain lower for those, because it could put off people applying for planning permission for those.
That's good. I did read that. Yeah, I was just wondering if this is our chance to get as much income as we can. And if okay, I'm not being greedy.
But striking a balance between proportionate amount of time.
Yeah, again.
Can I just ask members, because it's not in the report, it's something that came up in the National Parks England's response on listed building fees. The joint response is saying that people shouldn't pay twice. So if there's a development that requires listed building consent and planning permission, indeed like ours was here, you should only pay one fee, and it's just standalone listed building consents that should be chargeable. So that's what the other parts are saying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My question was also related to fees, but Paul, could you just put up the penultimate slide before that? So it's not. I mean, Chris, the balance is if you put up the fees so much, you're not going to get any applications. So I just wanted that second from bottom. line supports doubling of planning fees of household apps, but suggests smaller apps should not increase. What is a smaller app?
We've basically said extensions versus stuff in the curtilage, if that makes sense. So a shed or a fence, probably a smaller fee might apply. But if you're building an extension, that's a bigger scale development, a full fee might be appropriate.
Do you think a doubling of planning fees, that's a big increase, will result in a fall of applications, or you're not worried about it?
I don't think it's a problem because, as I explained, I think if somebody's paying £50,000 for a house extension, they won't blink by paying £500 for the fee or £250. I'm suggesting, unless they're really tight and they're from Yorkshire perhaps, but no, I think it's still a really low proportion of the overall cost. Yeah, and I think most people don't want to do the wrong thing, do they? And be sort of going against regulations. Most people don't want to do that. Particularly if we say, actually, government think about charging for enforcement cost recovery as well, that will counter that potential.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the helpful update and presentation. It is a big change and clear indication of the direction of travel for the new government. It clearly puts increasing house building across the country at the forefront of their agenda, and clearly they are interested in building more houses. So I think we agree on that. So does that mean that, say, for example, if there is a piece of land within the boundaries of a local authority, and that piece of land could be used to build more houses in terms of number of houses, rather than, say, smaller number of houses, then will there be pressure on the local authority that is considering that piece of land to try to find ways to have more housing built on that piece of land?
That's one for the evidence in the local plan review of concern, basically. So certainly there'd be more pressure for housing in local authorities, but it's one for the planning system and the local planning system to sort out in terms of where it goes.
Okay, so it is in for the planning system within the direction of travel of the government, basically, or within the local authority itself. So does that vary from local authority to another?
I can't speak for the local planning authorities, I'm afraid. But yeah, it is. All I can say is there will be the additional pressure on local planning authorities to find demand for housing.
Yes, and I'm saying this, of course, because what we've got here in Rickle Drive, because we've got a piece of land. Obviously, you are aware why I asked the question. We've got a piece of land there. It could be used in more than one ways. We have today residents who obviously are keen on having more houses in their community, which is obviously not the usual thing you hear from residents who are coming to protest. So clearly they are interested in having more houses. So I'm assuming that as a result of that, North Yorkshire Council, as the local planning authority, will be taking into account the new policy and the new direction of travel for the government when they are making decisions about the potential use of land.
And that'll be part of the next plan review. At the moment, it's allocated for employment use, and yes, applications have to be made in accordance with the development plan.
Okay, thank you.
Janet?
Thank you for the report, and I agree with the recommendations, but could I just ask a question? The doubling of planning fees, is it still the intention that this is about full cost recovery? It isn't about income generation. This is about saying this is what it costs us to do this job, and we haven't been able to recover those costs. It is full cost recovery, isn't it?
It's full cost recovery. It's very specific in the consultation. They're asking us what stuff we spend money on that we can recover.
Yeah.
It's not about profit generation.
Thank you very much.
Malcolm?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I mean, I think this is a good report. I mean, I support all the things that you mentioned to comment on. I'm just amazed at the fact that there's changed the methodology for housing and made it mandatory. And so the impression I get from the discussion from North Yorkshire councillors, and I fully understand it, is that there's major concerns about this. And I agree that we need to be fully speaking with one voice, isn't it? Just confirm that we are. Because, as you explained, Michelle, it does have implications for this authority in the long run, probably. I look forward with interest to see how the discussion is going. I'm sure that's going to be a national debate. I mean, in terms of the listed building, if you're suggesting that we change or add another recommendation, as you were saying, Chris. I mean, I'm fully supportive of that as well. I think the only other point I'd make is that you say when we did do this sort of experiment, as it were, about recovering costs, it was extremely successful. Not particularly in financial terms, although that was okay, but in the reduction in people sort of doing that sort of thing. And if you could just strengthen that maybe a bit in the report, to emphasise to them what the benefits were, and that there were significant benefits, and that it was, in our view, very unfortunate that that it was pointed out that we were unable to do that, and it would be very good to do it because, you know, we did do it for 2 years and there is the experience there to show that it works. So I think you can kind of beef that up a bit. So subject to that, I'm fine with everything else.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. Just very quick, do we have a policy on wind turbines in our local plans still?
We do, but it's basically parroting the existing government policy. So it's going to be one we're going to have to review in the next local plan review. So at the moment it says that you can only have a wind turbine if you've got full community support, which never happens. And it's a suitable area in a plan. So basically we've got the last government's national line of pretty much ban on wind turbines.
Okay.
But having said that, the government's now shifted its policy position. So we did approve a small one last week, I think.
Yeah, we approved two at Grouse Hill. The answer is our policy's shot to bits because the government's changed its policy and it hasn't really come up with a new policy other than a very strong support for renewable energy generally. So the NPE response is saying that's fine, but we need a little bit more detail and nuance for how national parks can help with that agenda while still protecting the landscape from excessively sized schemes.
So we have other policies that still use to regulate scale and impact.
Yeah, as a stopgap, we can use the major development test or just the general protection we've got in the strategic policy. But we still think we need a little bit more sophistication about, you know, how we do deal with individual wind turbines and indeed solar arrays in national parks.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. So, in the discussion, I think Malcolm just mentioned putting a little bit more information into the enforcement costs charging response. Our office is happy with that. Yeah. Otherwise, recommendations are to note the changes proposed to the NPPF and to agree the proposed response and consultation set out as tweaked. Happy to do that?
Yes.
But what about the listed building bit, Jim?
Was there something about listed buildings?
Chris mentioned listed buildings.
It was to charge for standalone listed building applications rather than people having to pay twice if they're associated with a planning application.
So is that another change to our response? Okay. So I missed that. We're happy to accept that change to the response?
Yes.
Great. So with those two tweaks, I'm happy again to accept the response.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. Great. We'll take a 5, maybe convene at 20 past, sorry. 20 past, and we'll reconvene and restart the live stream.
It's on.
Okay, so live stream is on. Thank you. We shall come on now to item 10, which is the property review quarterly update. Ian's there, ready to deliver this for us.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. This is our quarterly update, and this time, rather than just focusing on this building and Rickle Drive, which I will say a little bit about, I was really keen to say a little bit, and I've included this in the paper, about the wider set of work that we're doing in terms of delivering the outcomes that were envisaged in the property review. And I just think it's important that you sort of understand the breadth of what we're doing. But just to bring you up to date on what we've been doing, first of all, at Rickle Drive. Since you gave your approval for us to apply for planning consent at the last NPA, focus of the work has been to continue to develop the finer points of design around the work needs of staff, particularly outdoor-based staff and volunteers. And while the first floor office largely takes care of itself, we've been mindful of the comments made by one or two members and some of our staff, and we've done quite a lot of work engaging with reception and support team just to make sure we've got a really good way of welcoming visitors to our new site. Helen Barry, our property manager, has spent a lot of time going through the costs and the design line by line, and there are hundreds of lines of data, just looking at all those costs, taking some costs out, definitely. On occasions, we feel we've been a little bit light and we've added a little bit of cost back in. But Helen's worked closely with the architect just to make sure we've got a really thorough understanding line by line of what we're buying. And so we've made a number of changes and made some cost savings, but without compromising the integrity of the building. And now that the planning application's been submitted, the next stage is to develop a detailed tender pack. So Bowman Riley, who we've been working with, have produced the design for us, but the tender pack is that very detailed document which goes down to the level of detail of you join steel joist A to steel joist B, and this is the size of the bolt that joins them together. It's that kind of level of detail to enable contractors to give us a realistic and full pricing. Now, we have a couple of options in terms of how we deal with that. We could wait until we have our planning consent from North Yorkshire Council, but all the soundings that we've taken from the planners is that they feel we've got a good design. But we could delay until we get the planning consent, but we feel that will not be a particularly effective use of our time and will delay us by 2 or 3 months. And we have to do this piece of work around getting the tender documents together, because that then enables us to come back to you in due course with this is the final number about what it's going to cost and this is the business plan, because we're obviously conscious we need to come back to you for approval. So in para 3.10 of the report, I've asked that we bring forward £50,000 worth of expenditure that we'd originally earmarked for 25-26 to bring it forward into this year. That doesn't change any of the overall costs. It just brings some costs forward. So moving on, we're not anticipating doing any more work around the old vicarage, and you as the planning committee obviously talked about the planning application and listed building consent at some length a couple of weeks ago. So moving into other areas of the property review, and again, one of the outcomes of the property review was around our ranger bases. We've made some significant progress in our northern ranger bases, and if you recall, we've been on a series of short-term lease arrangements at Lealholm and Castleton, both of which ended this year. We're now delighted that we've got a 10-year lease working with the Camp Hill Trust at Bottom Village, which is a location that works well for us. We've got a good facility there, and it's a great organisation for us to be working with. So a 10-year contract gives us a decent security of tenure, and just means that Northern Ranger team can crack on with their work without thinking about, well, where's our base going to be next year. And at the same time, we've also been talking to the National Trust, and they've a site on a farm just south of Whitby, which if we determine we need a secondary equipment store on the coast, with an option to use that. We haven't made a final decision yet about whether we think we need to use that or not, but we have got another site, and the indications are that we can have a good security of tenure there as well. So overall, in terms of our Northern Ranger sites, we feel we've made some good progress there. Again, one of the outcomes of the property review was to continue to improve facilities at our national park centres, which is obviously where we welcome best part of a couple of 100,000 people a year. We've been talking about installing a changing places facility at Sutton Bank for a number of years, and I'm delighted that we've secured some external funding this year. And so that has now gone in and will be formally opened this week. And that really nicely complements the work that we've done on the tramper trails and getting a couple of trampers on site at Sutton Bank. We get a significant number of compliments from visitors with a range of disabilities, just saying Sutton Bank is a great site. It means they can come out with their families. And we had a lovely piece in a short while ago from a couple who got married at Sutton Bank and had used one of our trampers as their wedding vehicle, which was fantastic. And the staff there had worked hard to enable that to happen. But yeah, lots of good stuff happening. And the work that Joel and his team have done at Danby Lodge on renewing the play area, we made sure that design included facilities for youngsters with a range of disabilities. So again, I think in terms of improving our facilities at national park centres, we've made some great strides this year. On other property matters, we've started having a look at our car park and associated land at Gromont, which we have on a leasehold arrangement. Used to be with Scarborough Borough Council, now sits with North Yorkshire Council. It's quite, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's quite a big sprawling site with a patch of woodland car park area. It's got quite a few remains from the old ironstone industry. And also we're the proud owners of a public footbridge, which we have licence to site across the network rail platform, on the network rail platform, across the network rail line and onto the North Yorkshire Moors Railway line. So there's quite a bit there around cost and liability, and we're just trying to really get under the skin of all of that so that when our lease comes up it's 3 or 4 years away, but we may decide that we want to open negotiations with North Yorkshire Council a little bit earlier. So there's quite a bit of work just thinking around future liabilities, profitability of the car park and so on there. So that's quite an interesting piece of work. You'll also recall last year we handed quite significant liability back to North Yorkshire Council for the service road at Thorntondale car park, and all that was completed a little bit earlier in the year. The tension on that car park is now having a look at the wall which goes around a good part of our site there. It's the old wall garden. That is needs some maintenance and repair, and so we again just trying to get under the skin of the scale of work that's needed there and therefore the costs. And that wall's listed, so yeah, we need to pay some attention to that. But that's a piece of work that's just starting. So overall, while the headline and we've spent a lot of time talking about what we're doing with this building, potential for a Rickle Drive development, and so on. I just wanted to take this opportunity to assure you we continue to work hard on the wider property review and delivering on the outcomes that we set ourselves. Okay, thanks, Jim.
George?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report and for this presentation. I mean, we saw earlier from the response of the Chair to the members of the public who attended the meeting this morning who were protesting against the plans of the National Park. The Chair mentioned that final decision about the Rickle Drive plan has not been yet made, so that might not go ahead. He explained exactly the context of that, but it is not a final decision has not been made, as it was said earlier. We heard from the officer of the North York Moors National Park Authority earlier in the previous agenda item about the planning developments nationally and how that could have an impact on the way different local authorities will be operating. So therefore, there are still some uncertainties about the Rickle Drive development, and I am slightly concerned that if we go ahead with bringing forward the amount of money that you are suggesting, we are at risk of throwing good money after bad. And I know the initial decision was made a while back in 2021, before I became a member of the National Park Authority. And since then, a lot of money, effort, and resources have been spent on this project. And this is at a significant cost to the taxpayer. And as I mentioned, there are risks why this might not go ahead. But my concern is that all these costs that have already been spent and the possible costs that you are suggesting that we spend today is going to affect us as a National Park Authority in making a balanced decision. Because if we, say, for example, decide not to go ahead with the Rickle Drive development, then we will be seen as having wasted huge amount of money, effort, and resources over a number of years. So I would say that if we wait until more certainty in relation to what's going to happen with the Rickle Drive plans, then at least we stop throwing good money after bad.
Thanks, George. I'll just take a few more before we come back to Ian. Jane and then Michelle.
Thank you very much indeed. Just on the design, have all the members seen the final design before you consider going into making it financed, line by line? Sorry, I thought the words just gone from me.
So members saw the final design that we were submitting for planning application at the last National Park Authority meeting. The work that we've been doing is just is around the internal layouts and making sure they work properly for our staff and needs. That isn't part of the planning application, which is around the design and scope of the building. The precise internal layout isn't subject to planning. We've been talking with staff. Happily share that with members in due course when that's finalised.
I think yes, I realise that we've seen the planning, but when you're talking line by line just isn't the outside of a building; it's an inside of a building. So that's why I'm questioning if the members have seen that.
Members saw the original internal layouts and had a number of very helpful comments, which we've built in. I'm certainly happy to come back with finalised designs, but also conscious at some point we need to say that that's what we're going out to tender on.
And the reason why I asked that is I've had questions from an organisation saying that at the moment they share with you, but at the moment you wouldn't consider allowing them to have their own place that would be private. And because at the moment the designs are the fact that we are keeping everything open plan. So is that an absolute thing that everything is open plan, or is there an opportunity where we might be getting some rent coming in to look at having some areas closed? So I'm just questioning it because outside is different to inside, if you see what I mean. And if we're looking at spending local authority or spending our own money, are we looking at it and making sure that right at the beginning we've got opportunities that would allow us to make or assist in reducing our costs?
Yes, I mean, at the moment we currently rent some office space here to the Howardian Hills National Landscape, and I've talked with their lead person, and we would very much like to continue to share with them, and I think we can certainly do a better job than we do at the moment in terms of hosting them. We've talked around their particular needs. And if that organisation wanted a space within our workspace that was dedicated 100% to them, even though they're not in all the time, then we would need to reflect that in our rent. We can most definitely find space and accommodate the team and would welcome them. And in terms of private meeting space, they will be able to use any of our meeting rooms. So I'm absolutely confident from talking to their lead officer that we can not only accommodate their requirements, but we'd very much welcome continuing to work with them on site.
I'll go to Michelle.
Firstly, just to welcome the changing places at Sutton Banks. I know we talk to people who benefit and use such facilities, how important it is, and having that knowledge and comfort that there's a facility like that there. So I think it's great news. On the issue of the tendering, my personal view is that I think we should do the process in parallel, because in my experience over the years, having dealt with contractors, having dealt with people doing tenders, is that often what's presented in a tender document, there may be issues with it, there may be things that need clarifying. So the sooner you know about that, the better, so that you can be clear about potential pitfalls around costs, etc. It actually gives you an earlier indication as to whether or not there are decisions that would need to be made. So I actually feel, yes, it costs money now, but actually it is a sensible thing to do, because it actually allows us then to bring in the people who are actually, once you talk to people who are potentially going to build this, then you're developing that relationship, and that is important for the future project management going forward. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't do that in parallel. Planning, there's always a risk, and I don't want to really sort of preempt the planning process, but the reason we have local plans and allocated sites, and the reason we went down that route, is that we have clarity as to what type of use would be appropriate for people to put in planning applications on. And I would just make a point, and I've had to make this in my own area to people about local plan sites. In order to change the use of a local plan site, you need the agreement of the landowner. So it's all fine to people saying the council cannot turn around to somebody who's asked for it to be used for one thing and then say we'd like to use it for another thing. You have to have their agreement. If they don't agree, they will simply go to the planning inspector at the inspection stage and say they've been treated unfairly, that they've acted according to what the council did, they've acted according to what the planning inspector signed off, and this is unreasonable. And I can bet you a pound to a penny the planning inspector will say you have been unreasonable, not Yorkshire Council. You can't do that to people. The process takes long enough. There's a reason it takes long enough, and a reason why it takes years to go through. To then say we'll keep moving things around like the pawns on a chessboard isn't going to be sustained by the planning inspector. We have to be realistic here. Planning inspector has the final say on all of these things, but I think I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks, Michelle. Further comments? Colin.
Thanks, Chair. Two small points, really. You mentioned the bridge at Gromont, which I have to fetch up. You said one end sites on the North Yorkshire Moors car park that we actually rent, and the other on North Yorkshire Moors Railway platform. Now, is it exactly on their platform? Is it a chance that North Yorkshire Moors Railway or the Network Rail actually could own it or should own it? And as we only rent the land in the car park, is there a chance that we could actually give the bridge back to one, the other, or the other at the end of this 4 years? The other one was we're looking for new catering managers at the two sites that we have for visitor general public. How far has that gone at the moment? Thank you.
Same question.
Sorry, I wouldn't know for time.
Mine relates to Colin's question, that's all.
Okay, can you go ahead now?
Because so you don't answer twice, right? Yes, mine relates to the bridge as well. I mean, you did answer that we own the bridge. I didn't realise we own the bridge. Okay, so Colin's made a valid point about where the sanctions are. Is it on the other side? I mean, who's going to be the most disadvantaged by that bridge being not in operation? Supposing somebody says, right, it's not fit for purpose, close it. I mean, I would have presuming the North Yorkshire Moors Railway will be ones that are going to be really the ones that we want the car parking bit at the moment. So that's my thing: is who's got the most to lose? And is it a bridge, a historic bridge? Is there any funding for being historic bridge and getting some funding? We're very good at doing that. There you are. That's to go along with Colin. Thank you.
I do. Helen's been really enjoying herself having a trawl through our ancient archives, and has found that actually the authority purchased the bridge in kit form from a railway in East Sussex, somewhere around the late 1990s, and it was transported up here and built on site. So it's not a historic feature of that particular railway station. So the oddity of the arrangement is we own the bridge, we have a licence from Network Rail to span their active rail track, and separate to that we have a lease agreement formerly with Scarborough Borough Council, now with North Yorkshire Council. So we are at least some way forward, and we now properly understand the balance of lease, licence, and who owns what. There are quite a few issues to tease out in terms of maintenance of the bridge. Your point, Heather, around, well, who benefits from that bridge. There are multiple people, not only users of our car parks, certainly users of the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, and certainly from that site, from our car park site, the pedestrian access without a bridge is along a road which in part doesn't have a public footpath. So it's not necessarily as easy as just saying, well, okay, we'll just have the bridge taken away. And of course, having the bridge taken away comes at potentially really quite a significant cost, because again, it spans an active rail track, so we would need to get all the licenses in place and a specialist contractor to remove it, and so on and so on. But that's a piece of work that's ongoing to determine our options. But yeah, I was certainly interested to find out that we'd bought this bridge effectively in kit form and we owned it.
Thanks, Ian. Useful update. Janet.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the report. It's really good to see the work that's been undertaken at the various locations that the National Park owns, and particularly enjoyed the experiences at Danby Lodge and the work that's done there. They're very sensitive, thoughtful work, and also at Sutton Bank and the changing places facility at Sutton Bank was recently discussed just last week at the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion meeting, where people really appreciate that work. So some really good stuff that's going on. My question is really just to be clear, and it goes back to this and Rickle Drive, and it's about understanding the money being brought forward and the need to use that money now. And I understand what the point you've made, George. But my understanding of this is that, and please, it's sort of a question, is that is it the case that we need to do this work, we need to cost this work out so that we can make a decision with the full facts in front of us? Is that it? Because to not do it means that we won't be able to make a decision because we don't know what it's going to cost. Is that for me is the nub of why I would support the money being moved forward.
I won't have any more words. That's exactly the case.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, but I was just conscious Colin asked two questions, of which Ian only addressed the first one quite rightly. And the second question was around the retendering of the food and beverage offers at the National Park Centre. So just to update members, we've had quite a bit of interest. We've spent a lot of time going out and just soft testing the market and getting people aware of the opportunities. We're in a better position than we would have been because clearly having the new playground has significantly impacted on the number of visitors at Danby Lodge, which, while that only gives us a month or two's data, it's still enough to give people a bit more confidence about the fact that this centre will have the footfall in the future in order to then potentially for people to then put in an expression of interest. So we've had various open days, well, more mornings and evenings. So again, we've had quite a lot of people who are through as part of that. We're now at the stage which is known as the Standard Selection Questionnaire stage, SSQ. So that's when people complete a short expression of interest type form, and from that we will then appraise those, and we will then make decisions as to who then goes forward to a more formal tender process, which would then happen. So the deadline for that is, I think, about the 5th of October. So we should be moving forward into the more formal tender stage throughout the remainder of October, and we'll be looking to make decisions around about November. The current licence expires on the 12th of January, so that should allow us, as well as a cooling off period that we have to have under procurement regulations, it should allow us time to get everything in place and for there to be an orderly handover. That's the processes things. Obviously, there are certain risks involved with anything like this, but that's the position where we're up to. So far, so good.
Thanks for that, Joel. Thank you. Anybody else? George?
Just to come back, there are other uncertainties that are not related to spending the money that could affect the decision of the National Park Authority, including what was mentioned earlier today, the residents mentioned earlier today about the adjacent planning application. So it's not only the money, but there are other uncertainties as well.
Thanks, members. So we've had a good debate and a good update, and I think the issue in paragraph 310 is that we bring 50,000 forward from the property reserve into this year's budget to enable the tendering process to be fast-tracked. And we've had a debate about that in two senses. You know, there's been strong support for that and strong reservations, and I think I'm in the middle of that, to be honest, because what I am concerned about is that is the time lag. You know, if you're going to have a place quote for something, it's useless having that until you're within the time frame of being able to achieve it. And I'm probably, like Michelle, fairly confident that the planning advice that we've got will lead us to getting a planning permission. But again, if you look at the other side, that's been in abeyance for 2 years, and we shouldn't underestimate the potential for a number of reasons for, if nothing else, delay. And so the other thing is that, you know, the line by line decisions, and there are some tweaks, and property working groups heard about that, and hopefully we'll hear about more before we go to a final tender pack, as Jane mentioned. You know, we need to be sure, getting planning application is one thing, what we're actually really going to genuinely pay for, we need to be quite sure of that. And so I don't mind bringing the money forward myself, but I think I would be, I wouldn't want to do stuff that we then had to go back on. And so you know, if it was me, my own money, I wouldn't be spending it until I saw the planning application personally. But if there's stuff that we can do and have to do before that, but I think the worry for me is the uncertainty of the time as much as the outcome, and whether that might make the scope of the costings that we do. I mean, we're using the same company that we've used along the way, and so they should be able to give us a bit of grace in that, if they know that you know the payday's coming. But just a comment on that, please, Ian.
I think what we're wanting to do is do some of the preparation work now, so that we're in a position when we have planning consent to go out to tender. I don't. We're not going out to tender before we've got planning consent, because that would be, in my view, that would be not a sensible place for us to end up. But there is a lot of work to develop those very detailed plans that then need to go out to potential contractors. And what we're asking for is the okay to go ahead and start doing some of that detailed work, partly in parallel with North Yorkshire Council considering our planning application.
Jane?
Could we just know what we've spent on this so far, so that we know what we've spent so far, and then what this 50,000 would be in addition, so at least we've got an idea in our heads where we are, because if something's to go over 2 or 3 years, you sort of forget where you are.
I don't know if that might be something for property working group or a future meeting.
I haven't got those numbers in front of me, but very happy to bring those forward to either next meeting or property working group.
And the point is that we have committed to doing a business plan, to evaluating the proposal, and we cannot get that completed without, as Janet rightly says, without this piece of work being done. I just want to make sure that we don't have to do any of this work twice. George?
Should that not be brought to a public meeting rather than the working group, which is a private group, because it's not sensitive information that would prejudice the National Park's interest? I think it should come to a public meeting.
Sounds like another public question, George, doesn't it? But yeah, whichever way. I mean, those figures are.
So that was the question. Is it going to come to a public meeting? The answer that Jane asked.
What we've said all along around public debate around the finances of this project is, when it comes to members making a final decision, we'll come to you in a public meeting with the costs of new build, the costs of renovating this place, and the business case that sits behind that, and nothing has changed around that.
Sorry, I'm just confused because it was said earlier that it's going to come to the working group, but now, so are we talking about the historical costs? Are they going to come to the members in the public meeting?
I'm certainly all at the last NPA we provided in the private paper costs of our new build, and that included costs already incurred, so that information is already there. I'm keen that while we're talking about costs, we don't have that ongoing debate in the public arena when we properly understand what the project either to stay here and renovate Sawmill Lane, or our new build. That should quite rightly be in the public domain.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, Jane asked the question as to whether those ongoing costs could be found.
The appropriate place to share those would be at Property Working Group, and I would be more than happy to do that.
Okay, but they are publicly available, but I think, Jane, you were asking for your own explanation.
Yeah, we can certainly sort that.
Okay. Patrick.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Ian, for this excellent report. I'm minded to, I slightly share the Chairman's opinion about very, very conscious of not having to spend money twice. And on these sort of projects, it's easily done. So could you just set up what the timetable is and how long this tender process would be and when you might, I know it's impossible to predict really, but when might we know whether we've got planning, and is this tender stage a 3-month project, a 6-month project? You know, because that might help us decide whether or not to bring forward this money.
At this point, I'll look to my right to ask Chris for his best intelligence on when North Yorkshire might determine our planning application, and then I'll ask Helen to give us an update.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So the planning application was submitted at the beginning of this month. We've not received confirmation that it's validated yet, but I have received confirmation from the likely case officer that they've received it. It's been allocated a reference number, so that validation will be imminent. Once they've received it, they have a statutory 13-week period to determine it. If they haven't determined it within 13 weeks, there's a right to appeal non-determination. So that takes us probably towards the end of November, early December, for a decision. But I have asked if there's any issues, please get in touch with us as soon as possible so we can resolve anything. So I hope to have a close working relationship as we go through the planning process.
So the follow-up is that if you did this tender process, or the stage 4 work to get you up to this tender, is how many weeks?
Helen, to answer that.
We're expecting a tender process, I think, on the size of this project to be about 3 months.
3 months?
Yeah, something of that order. I mean, it could be longer. So what ideally we'd like to do is do as much as we can in this sort of waiting time. And there are a list of jobs which are sort of in 2 phases, which are clearly laid out in the REBA cost schedules and timeframes. We're now in the tender process is sort of stage 5 and 6. There's a construction, and it's writing this tender report. And it is really as a matter of timing. It has to be done, to your point, and it can wait until planning, but it just means everything 3 or 4 months always down the line. What I'd quite like to do is get as much as we can done, even if it's researching who we might go to, because a lot of that will take time. But in order to get the actual pack, to your point, yes, and to your point about sort of doubling up, we won't be going to writing, what the actual detail until we have the absolute final design. But there is lots that we can be doing which isn't doubling up and will save us time.
Christine.
Thanks, Chair. Just for clarity, because I don't think at these authority meetings we normally allocate funding to things. I thought that was a job that's normally left to FRASC, which looks at the finances and things. Am I wrong in that thinking?
No, I think in this instance, it's perfectly reasonable for the authority to take a decision on allocation of funding that's not previously been allocated or delegated to officers, which is why the proposal has been made in this paper.
On that basis, I tend to lean towards Jane's point that we're presented with a paper about a financial decision and given no supporting figures upon which to make that decision. And I find that an uncomfortable position to be asked to do that. I mean, there's nothing in here about our reserves position or other things where the funding's coming from, how it all adds up. And I just think that's not terribly helpful. I also appreciate, the property working group, and obviously I've elected not to be a part of that group for various time commitment reasons, not lack of interest. And I, to George's point, I think it's unreasonable that we continue to have things about this property process without being presented a full package of information. So even though figures were presented to us, there were some errors in those that haven't been yet corrected. Albeit, which I wouldn't have expected to, accepting that we're being brought further questions about money being spent. And so I just think there's something about the join up around it. And whilst I appreciate Ian's point that he doesn't want to sort of fan the flames of public discussion, I think sometimes secrecy does that. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I must say, the budgetary requirement of the paper is quite well hidden in it, I have to say, and so I do have some sympathy with that. If we're changing our budgetary arrangements, it would have been easier to have been clearer in the recommendation, but it is there at 310, and the point is this is money that we have allocated that we will need to spend, and I think the question before us now is whether we're happy to take a bit of leeway on that to maybe gain a few months in time, or whether we'd want to be completely certain and possibly lose a few months in time. But I don't think that this is money that we can't spend or don't have to spend. We will have to spend it to get to a business plan, to get to a quote, and to be able to fulfil the equation and the decision on the way forward that we need to take. So I'm a bit in your hands with that. I mean, I think I might have to take a vote as to whether members are happy to allocate this money forward from the property reserve. Just remind us exactly what you're wanting to do, Tom or Ian, and then we'll decide whether we have to do that or not.
So we're looking to bring forward an additional 50,000 from the property reserve to spend to help with the production of the tender pack.
Yes, to run in parallel with the planning process, because we believe that's a more efficient use of our time.
When were you expecting to spend that money otherwise?
We were expecting to spend it in 25-26, but certainly with us bringing Helen on board gives us extra capacity on the property side, and also brings us considerable expertise and experience of managing this sort of project. So with more capacity, more expertise, so we are able to do this piece of work now rather than wait for planning consent, which is what we had originally envisaged.
Heather?
Yeah. I accept what you're saying about this. I mean, not being on the property group or the FRAST, but let's put it this way: without this, we can't really evaluate what this scheme is going to cost before we make our decision. So I think it's a no-brainer. We have to find out exactly if we're going to go through with this. We've got to look about the building. All right, before we go for the planning, we've got to know what we're going to put there, and without this, and what's going to be inside of it, we've got to do it. Really, what if we didn't do it? What would we do? We'd be sat here in 6 months' time, and then we still wouldn't be able to know whether we've done right or wrong without the valuation of it. So, sorry, I propose that we accept the recommendation. Thank you.
I'm going to move on. If Heather's proposed that we accept that, which is really useful, I'm happy to second that from the chair. Or are you going to second that, Malcolm?
Yeah, I can do, but I wanted to just ask a question first.
Okay, well, so to move things on, that the recommendation is proposed by Heather, seconded by Malcolm, and we can go for or against that when we vote. If we go against it, then we would amend it to say that we wouldn't bring forward 50,000, and we would note the rest of the report. So that's how we're going to do business. We're now debating that. Go ahead.
I just want to be clear, because I mean, Jane asked I thought a really good question, which is, when will the property group see the final detailed plans that this tender is done on? And well, you may want to come back to the table, because I'm presuming this 50,000 is being spent on the experts looking at all the detail and working on that. And so the question I'm asking, am I right in assuming that that work can start before the final details are actually agreed? Because I'm assuming also that the final details will be coming to the property working group for approval. And can you just clarify what?
I suppose it's partly because we're having.
The question I'm asking is, when are you going to start spending this 50,000?
Okay.
And if the answer to that is before the details are come to the property group, I just want to be clear about that.
I suppose it's partly the timing of this meeting is that it's sort of quarterly, isn't it? So we need to get on with an amount of work. We're not proposing to spend the money tomorrow, but probably before the next time. We need to keep the momentum going if we want to keep this project on track with which you've been talking about previously. So it's sort of so we can ask for permission now and to spend it at the appropriate time in our time frame. So that we're not jumping the gun, we're not spending it and then risk spending it again, because I won't let that happen, because I'm only going to go to tender when absolutely no, and there'll be another property meeting group before we do any of that. But it's just like a timing of this meeting, the decisions, and keeping the process going.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Is the likelihood that we start spending the money before the property groups endorse that? Or
I think some of it will need to be spent before and can be spent before, because some of it won't be just on the design, some won't be on some of the other aspects, because we have to get all the sort of building control people in and all that sort of stuff. There's lots of people that need to be put in place, and project managers to help put that process in place as well. Yeah.
I thought that was probably the answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's
fine. Just to point out, I mean, the property working party group, whatever, doesn't actually make decisions. It's just there to be closer to the information. The decisions will be made by full authority when that time comes. So just to be clear on that. And also, the property working party group did consider the progress, and it considered and had a look at the report which we are looking at now. And so, for the property working party, this should be a surprise. We did look at this as the report coming to NPA, and that's what we've got. But decisions won't be made by the property working party. It's just an opportunity for the members who have time and interest to be closer to the information, so that we can have an informed debate decision here. And I do think, actually, I mean, it could well be, I'm not sure that it will be, but it could well be the case that the planning process goes without a hitch, that it concludes before the end of the year, and that we will be having to wait 3 months until next year's budget to get this. And so I think my own vote is that putting this money in the right place that it can be used when that time is reached enables officers to do that sooner, if that's appropriate. I think that's what we're asking to do. So I can't remember, if there wasn't anybody else, the recommendation is that we accept this report, including the moving forward of the 50,000. And if you agree with that, then you vote in favour. If you don't, then you can vote against, and we'll make an amendment that takes the 50,000 back into next year. So all those in favour of the proposal, please show.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
All those against? Any abstentions?
No.
So that is carried. Thank you.
Apologies, Chair. As I mentioned earlier, I've got an audit training in Northampton, which is starting in 15 minutes before the before the audit committee meeting starts at 1:30. So I'm just gonna make a move now. Well, I'm missing part of it already, but it's not a problem. That was very important. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be really quick with this, Chair. I'll take most of the report as read. Two things I did want to draw to members' attention. The first was the reference in my report to the management plan stakeholder forum that took place on the 11th of September. I know a number of members here attended that as members of the stakeholder forum, which brought together key stakeholders involved in the delivery of the National Park Management Plan to scrutinise how we're doing, but also to it's getting worse, isn't it? It's not, but also to it's supposed to be it, wasn't it?
It's always outside of the room. It's always there.
I don't know what to do. Anyway, I'll carry on. There's only a certain amount. My audio is always at a certain level, and I don't know how I can actually lower the decibel level. So I've completely lost my train of thought now. So yeah, stakeholder forum, great day, good scrutiny, but also some really inspiring, thought-provoking challenge, I thought, from the speakers around the national park, its role in health and well-being, and where we can bring various people together to actually have a more important make a more important contribution, particularly to some of the communities that are on our doorstep. And then the second thing I just wanted to draw members' attention as well in the appendix was a summary report from me of the members' strategy day, which was great to see most members in attendance. I think 15 out of 20 were there, which was brilliant. So I've attempted to consolidate the contributions that members made to the workshop sessions on that day together into a report that's Appendix 1. I'm not seeking approval for that per se, but I thought it was useful for members to be aware of that, even those that didn't participate in the day. And I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thanks, Tom. Good stuff. So it did cross my mind. We do have Tom's report of the strategy day, which was a really good day. Although we're not kind of formally approving it, it's here in our meeting as what happened. Does anyone have any particular issue with that, or no? I think it's a good account of a good session. Any other questions for Tom? Patrick?
Just very quickly to endorse management plan stakeholder forum, which is quite a thing to say, but was an excellent day, really well organised, and I learned an awful lot from it. So I think that to be encouraged, that should carry on being an annual event.
Yeah, no, I can cover that very briefly, Jane. So there are a list of about 50 organisations that form part of the stakeholder forum that we invite annually to this event. Not all of them turned up. We also extended an invitation to one or two select individuals or organisations that have a particular involvement in the delivery of health and wellbeing activities, both inside and outside the national park, just to bring some constructive debate and challenge around the workshop sessions. NPA appoints 4 members, I believe, to sit on the stakeholder forum as the representatives from the National Park Authority to it, and its role is laid out in the scheme of delegation to provide external scrutiny and oversight of the National Park Management Plan, which is a plan for the place, not just the authority.
Very good. Okay, well, if there's no more questions on Tom's.
I'm sorry, I had to make that phone call. I just wanted to go back on page 7. that bit confused now. I wanted to know exactly what that was relating to.
Far be it from me to suggest that any member is confused, and there's always a question of interpretation in the use of language. But we're not talking about theme parks. I can give you that reassurance. This is really about how we bring our our resource to support Ellen as our funding officer in making external funding bits. And it's never a binary choice, right? But you can either spend a lot of time chasing lots of small pots of money, or you can try and bring it together into bigger, more comprehensive, multifaceted funding proposals. And I got a clear steer from that meeting that even though we shouldn't be exclusive, and there always will be opportunities for 10 or 20k here or there for a discrete project, that there was added value stroke cost efficiency for the authority in going after bigger projects, which is why we've taken that approach with More Connected, which we're hoping to submit an application to the National Lottery Heritage Fund later this year.
I just thought.
That was good, and as I said, they are notes of the session rather than decisions that we're going to do. But I agree, and that's why I just mentioned it. But, yeah. So moving on then to feedback from lead members, and we have a report from Colin, which will go first. Then we've got ARB and EDI. I think Colin's report is there. Yeah, if you'd just like to introduce it.
I take it as read, really, Chairman. I put down most points that we went through on FRASC, and hopefully most people have read through it. I thought it was pretty good, really, the way I'd written it. But if anybody has a question or two, then I'm sure Pete can answer them if it's financial.
Okay, well, thanks for doing that. Any questions for Colin? We'll take that as read. Brilliant. That's good report, Colin. If there's no questions.
Took me long enough to type it.
So moving on to ARB, it's Janet. It's the joint one, isn't it? I can't remember who chaired that.
It is a joint one, but unfortunately Patrick couldn't attend that day and send his apologies, so that's why it's fallen to me to feed back. And now we're marking our homework, Colin. I think this is quite a good report as well. But the reason I say that, actually, tongue-in-cheek, is because for those of you who are more eagle-eyed than others will note that I have simply repeated what was already shared on SharePoint for members about the notes of that meeting, and just offered some thanks to members who were able to attend and officers. It was a really good day. Some of us got quite involved in the testing out the facilities at Danby Lodge. Indeed, I think I can assume they worked very well. I think both Jim and Jane enjoyed the facilities there. So I've got nothing else to report. Thank you very much, Chairman. And it was a great day.
Great. I think useful to have those minutes on the SharePoint so that we can refer to them, and the eagle-eyed and keen can do as much of that as they want to beforehand. So EDI, we don't have Arnold or John Ritchie. So I can't. Was anybody else here at the EDI? Janet, I mean, you don't have to say anything. It's just.
Actually, I was at the most recent one last week, but I didn't attend the last meeting. I was unable to attend, but I'm happy to help answer if anyone's got any questions. But I think just noted.
Did you want to? I think it is for questions. Was there anything you wanted to say about it, Joel?
It was really just to highlight that the latest meeting of the EDI group actually took place in Scarborough. We had a good debate at the previous meeting about the fact that we didn't just want to be a group that met either in this committee room or online, but to actually, one of the key challenges around Objective 13 in the management plan and underserved communities is we need to go where people are and to understand how communities that are 2 or 3 miles away from the national park boundary that might as well be 100 or 200 miles in terms of the amount of connection that they've got. And we had a really interesting morning meeting with members of locally trusted organisations, the local police sergeant who briefed us around one of the initiatives that's happening in the Barrowcliff estate area. And of course, it was chaired by John, who is ward councillor for quite a bit of that area as well. So we had a really interesting walk round afterwards, and I certainly, from my point of view, I came away really much more informed, and there's a lot of things that we've got to follow up on as part of that chat.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm sorry, I thought we were referring to the previous meeting in June, which I couldn't attend, but I did attend the meeting in Scarborough, which, as Joel said, was absolutely fabulous. We learned a lot. Apologies for my confusion.
Brilliant. Well, it's nice to hear. So I'm getting away from myself. I think that deals with the members on the lead members. Item 12. Moving on to item 13. Find it. There's reports from members on outside bodies. And we've got the North York Moors Trust. Is that Colin again?
Yes, Chair. I know we've heard a fair bit about trust today, but I shall try to put a bit more meat on the bone, as I say. We did have a strategy meeting back in July where health and wellbeing was stated as being, you know, the way forward, or the way James wanted to take us forward as well. And he was very enthusiastic about going that way. And then we had on the 12th of September just a few highlights really. From July last year to July this year, we'd raised over 100,000 in new grants, donations and sponsorships, and that's excluding Birds on the Edge. On Birds on the Edge, you know, the moment they've put in 5 restored ponds, 7 drinking pools, 2 hectares of habitat, 38 creative sessions with 36 young people, 4 conservation sessions, 17 young people, 3 family days, 461 primary school pupils engaged in the Harry Spotter Bird Spot Challenge, and 1 exhibition, 1 music video premiere, and 1 public art competition. Now that's just a few bits. The other projects, the Trust Treks, which James takes a body of guys out. It's probably a shoot off from Andy's Man Club at Teesside, which goes down very well. Stepping Stones to Nature, where they have an ex-teacher going into 2 primary schools in Redcar, Cleveland, Grangetown, to give them an insight into national parks, or what they would find in national parks. It was no good saying, you know, to them that I will take you out to a national park, because to be fair, they probably wouldn't have any idea as to what they were going to. So it was a precursor to getting them into the, you know, way of thinking of what the national park did, and how it was going. Now these children, on the days that the guy was going in, there was a better attendance at those schools. The children from the classes down below, they were keen to go up a year so that they could get into this class where they were being taught about nature, etc. And then in future, they're hoping to have maybe 5 schools. The guy's taking on another employee to do some of his work, but not the school work, and so that he can take on maybe his 5 schools, which the schools are obviously interacting and find it of great benefit to the children. So, you know, over a time, then it will expand to more schools, hopefully. Going on to nature prescriptions, and they've trained several dozen GPs and to prescribe locally, and they've obviously distributed 1,500 calendars to be prescribed. You know, it's all actions going forward, and to be fair, I mean, James isn't here, but you know, his enthusiasm is pushing the work forward all the way, like, and to be fair, he's still only on 4 days a week. He's probably working 7 on this, but he's only getting paid for the 4 days a week. He has a support team within the authority, which is Ellen on funding, Vicky on administration, and obviously Sandra on accounting, which it all proves very, very helpful to James in his work going forward. And James will, if asked, come into NPA just to give a report as well, if that's what members would like. He can obviously give a far better report than I can, and you know, if that's something members would like, then I'm sure James would come along and give a report on that. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin, for that update. Any questions for Colin? Well, I think having a report from the Trust is really good. I think we've had an annual report in detail, but it's a question of the amount of detail that's viable and useful to impart. So, okay.
Are we saying that James would like James to come in to give a report, or are you not, or are you?
I'm in members' hands, Colin. I'm in members' hands. I think definitely an annual report. Nothing.
We'll give him Christmas wishes now.
I mean, to be honest, I don't mind. I'm happy to leave it to Colin and James to decide who gives the report.
Yeah. And I think the importance is, I mean, if the authority has a question they want to know, they can ask it. If the Trust has something it needs to tell us, of course, this is an opportunity to do that. At the same time, you know, you don't have to say if no, it's happened. So it's there in the agenda. Yeah, it's there in the agenda for that purpose. If James wanted to come and do the next one, that would be great.
To be fair, Chair, what I didn't actually say was it was much appreciated, all the work that Tom's put in. I mean, we're a relatively new or the Trust, basically, and you know, we're putting one foot in front of the other going forward, but it's a case of, you know, knowing how to go forward. And I mean, I wouldn't have a clue, to be fair, but to have Tom sat in the chair and you know, pointing us in, I know he felt a pull one way or the other because of the Trust and the authority. Then, but it's much appreciated, all the work he's put in, and I'm sure if we do get a new chair, then I'm sure Tom will be sat there as a member of the Trust as well, or hopefully. But thank you very much.
No meetings of the Housing Board, and so I think that should conclude the reports from outside bodies, unless anyone shouts up that I've forgotten something. Okay. Item 14 on the record is there for your information. I don't think there's any decisions to make there, are there, Judith? No. So those items are there for your information. If no questions on that, that brings us to.
It says members' allowances. You know, how we're going to be paid a fortune like in future? Are we just is it just a 2% rise on what we're on at the moment?
I think Ian's gone, but we have the same formula as the rest of the authority, don't we?
Yeah, Ian's still here,
Oh,
so he's not drifted off completely. But yeah, my recollection is we index this in line with the any changes in salaries that are made to certainly the lower bands within the authority. I think we periodically benchmark as well vis-a-vis other national park authorities. Whether we're due to do that again at some point or not, I can't tell, but we do try and ensure that we're not being inconsistent, shall we say.
Can we quote train drivers on that? You know, or other public bodies like doctors, where they take away our fuel allowance, you know, to go forward, like, you know.
We are in public session, don't forget. Jane.
Just to make a comment that all of us seem to add up to the same price as our audit.
Oh, good spot.
I agree with that. Actually, I think the cost of members is, dare I say it, in marking my own homework, pretty good value for money. and so, yeah, that's reassuring to know. I just also bring your attention to Appendix 5, the member development discussions. So I think that this was put forward at FIASC, but if they're meant to be done by the end of the year, that in previous experience, we'll have to get on with that. So it's there for information, and if you could please, for those of you be having the discussions and doing and leading them, if you could try and get some dates in your diaries. Don't get too hung up with this. It doesn't have to be a massive thing. It would be just great to have done something by the end of the year. So it always is a struggle for us to get those done for a number of reasons. That brings me then to item 15, which is such other business as I have, and I have none. As item 16, do I have your agreement for exclusion of the public for the private minutes?
Yeah, agreed.
All happy? So return the live stream